Welcome to the new episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Leszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński, hello.
Hi Sebastian. It's very nice to come back to Hitchcock after our last foray into the downhill. That was probably the first Hitchcock film that we talked about here in this podcast, and we weren't crazy about it. It was a film that had numerous problems. It also was a film that had very interesting stuff in it. And I feel quite similarly about the film that we will discuss today. This is a film that's also from 1927. That is a very prolific year for Hitchcock. And it's called Easy Virtue. Probably so far the film I liked the least, and most possibly, if I remember correctly, my previous viewings of Hitchcock's films, probably my least favorite film in his entire oeuvre. How did you feel about this adaptation of a Noel Coward play?
I saw it for the first time recently, and I think it's, as with all Hitchcock movies, it's a great movie to talk about because Hitchcock fans and Hitchcock scholars, can dissect every scene, and as we mentioned in the first episode, they can see where did the master's tricks begin, right? So this is one of these movies that maybe points us to later Hitchcock movies, but this is probably this movie's biggest value, but still, is it enough of a value for a viewer to to really enjoy this movie nowadays? This is a question I think it's really important because it's rarely addressed by Hitchcock scholars whom I've read, like Charles Barr or other scholars who write about these early movies, analyzing them, but not including their own responses in the analysis, which is of course a valid scholarly approach. But I think that part of the fun that we have as two guys talking about Hitchcock is the question you raised at the very beginning, that if we really like this movie, if we respond to it. So I must say I had troubles with responding to Easy Virtue, also because the copy I have is not the class of The Lodger or Downhill, and of course Hitchcock, the Hitchcock 9 project launched by BFI, as far as I know. So this rescuing of Hitchcock movies, silent movies, made all of them restored, but I don't have this copy. I don't know if you had, but the quality of the copy was a bit worse, and some scenes were missing that really in one moment I couldn't get the very important part of the plot, which is the painter's suicide, which is cut out of the picture as far as my copy showed.
Yeah, well, this is exactly the same complaint that Charles Barr is making in his film. In his book, English Hitchcock, he also says that the print is bad and that we don't see the suicide and that there might be a continuity lack due to possibly censorship or possibly just the lacking of the print. Well, I'm not sure if this film was part of the digital restoration. We won't be seeing a standalone Blu-ray of this film coming anytime soon because it's simply not good enough to merit separate edition. I do hope that at one point we will see a new Blu-ray box of all Hitchcock's silent films. Then it would be wonderful to have this film as part of a box. I just cannot imagine this film getting a standalone release. And yes, I completely agree. I mean, this is the problem is that as we were talking, and this, by the way, for our listeners, this film is available on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube in, I guess, as good as print as you will find. The problem is that we have been dealing with the issue of melodrama since the very first show, since the initial episode where we discussed Pleasure Garden. And I think that Pleasure Garden, of course, was a melodrama, and Easy Virtue is a melodrama, The Lodger, Downhill as well. All these films are melodramas. I just think that of these four, Easy Virtue is simply the dullest and the most typical melodrama, drawing on the stage conventions of the time. We might as well discuss the plot of Easy Virtue, and basically it has to do with this rich socialite Larita, strange name, Slavic sounding, played by Isabel Jeans, whom we remember from Downhill, and she is going through a messy divorce concerning a possible sexual relationship with a painter who was painting her portrait as her husband was drinking away, and there's a shadow being cast on her new marriage. She meets a guy at the Riviera, of course. We will come back to the Riviera in To Catch a Thief, I guess. But in this very glamorous setting. And what I'm trying to say is that this is purely a melodrama from, let's say, the higher echelons of British society, as imagined in the most stereotypical and dull way. You know, the string of pearls, the mink stalls, the big country house, and this sort of class comedy and class horror of constant scanning of reputation and of virtue, as it were, and the heroine who is completely innocent. We are made to think that she's completely innocent. She wasn't involved with the painter. Apparently, in the play, in Noel Coward play, she actually was a sort of a free-spirited woman who was having many affairs, and she was actually kind of proud of it. So on the stage, I guess the material had a little bit more bite than it has on the screen, and especially because Isabel Jeans is so constantly overwhelmed by the vicious rumors, and she's so completely innocent. I just think that this whole premise is basically pretty dull, but maybe it's saved by Isabel Jean's performance, or do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there are some aspects of the movie that we can, let's say, save, or that save the movie. But so basically, as you mentioned, we have this kind of mirror of Downhill, but this time we have a woman who loses her reputation. So, this Easy Virtue and reputation and divorce, these are themes that Hitchcock is repeating all the time in this movie. And I agree that the genre of melodrama is, of course, firstly foreign to our sensibility nowadays, or at least we're not as familiar with this mode of storytelling. Actually, we're not as familiar as viewers then, of course, but also. Preparing for this episode, I finally looked into Romer and Chabrol's book on Hitchcock, and they, among many authors, they indicate that Hitchcock was forced to make this picture, that he didn't want to make Noel Coward's plays adaptation, and also that it was his last picture for Gainsborough Pictures, and then he started another stage of his career. So there is also this issue which is, I think, critical for many silent movies. So we take successful play, it may be a good play or a bad play, it doesn't matter actually, but we delete almost all, we get rid of the dialogues, which makes, just the skeleton is left. Some situations, some characters that maybe it's impossible to visualize it, to translate it into moving pictures, and and still save some qualities of this play. So I haven't read that play actually, to be honest, but maybe there's also something to it, that it was this wave, or actually the whole silent cinema is based on many literary sources. I mean, there are many adaptations, and in this case probably it was just it was the project that just couldn't be done well and couldn't survive the test of time.
Well, as we were talking, actually, Sebastian showed me a website, and it turns out that Easy Virtue is on Blu-ray in France. Well, I guess the French are always the first to appreciate even lesser movies by big authors. I wonder if that's a digitally restored print, or is it just slapped onto Blu-ray. We'll see. But I agree. And I mean, it's not only the question of melodrama, it's also apparently the question of basically making this material, which was on stage, had some more spice to it, very, very polite and also more morally clear. If we have a heroine who is so innocent and completely devoid even of sexual desire, because this whole relationship she has with the new husband is basically based on their sipping drinks on a French Riviera balcony, in a very long shot of the guy actually preparing the drink. I didn't know why.
You were waiting for the conclusion.
yeah, it was very strange. Those scenes really, I hate to use language like that because probably there was some reason for that, but those scenes appear quite lazy when you compare them to those clipped, very pointed scenes of The Lodger or even of The Ring, the film that we'll discuss next time. This seems like Hitchcock is just winging it, like he's just allowing the situation to play out, and it's not very interesting, but still, well, Donald Spoto in his biography, he makes this comparison, and Charles Barr also takes it up that there's some affinity between Noel Coward and Alfred Hitchcock, in that Noel Coward was gay and also sort of playing around with the notion of British class system and of social mobility within class system, and always sort of hiding in plain sight as a gay man in this society, and also playing around with conventions. You can see the character here as sort of a proto-gay character because she's being constantly judged, always shamed. And Hitchcock supposedly, in Spoto's view, also had this tremendous guilt about sexuality, so these two men would communicate quite well. Charles Barr says that he didn't find any evidence of them even communicating as they were writing or working on this film. So I honestly don't see many points when Hitchcock's imagination is ignited in this film, apart from some separated shots, like in the courtroom sequence, the head of the main judge, the wig that sort of looks like this very strange egg, and then it turns out to be the judge, and also the flashback structure in the court scene. That's probably the most interesting aspect of it.
Yes, this is the pretty impressive part of the movie, because Hitchcock uses props to kind of connect the past and the present. We have a decanter, we have a letter which appears in both in the past and in the present, and so he's using particular objects to kind of connect the two, and it's a pretty long opening. It's about 20 minutes of this courtroom drama, let's say. But there are also what I want to mention is that Hitchcock in interviews usually repeats the same anecdotes about particular movies, and in this case he's kind of taking pride in the scene when the character of Isabel Jeans is supposed to call the young man who's in love with her and to tell him if she wants to be with him, right? If she wants to marry him, and it's done in a single take, which is about 1 minute, and we see the teleoperator who starts to read the book, but then she begins to listen to the conversation, and so she's in a way, she's a viewer. She's a personification of a viewer, or rather a listener, someone who's, voyeuring the couple, listening to their conversation. And through her facial expressions, we get to know the results, the conversation, and she's happy at the end, and so on. But I don't want to describe this scene to show how brilliant it is, although it's clever. But just it's one of these scenes that Hitchcock is repeating all the time, that he's proud of. And many Hitchcock scholars also describe this scene and several other scenes. So it's kind of difficult to look anew at these movies because they are somehow. And for example, Hitchcock also says that the final line, which is shoot. There is nothing left to kill, or I think that's somebody like that. That he's ashamed of it, but still he's speaking this line, which kind of and it makes this line the final title, not the line, but the final title is remembered that way, that viewers remember it. So there is this kind of PR element in this in his treatment of his early movies. And I just wonder, because you started talking about this, the opening, the courtroom scene, and is there anything else that was kind of overlooked by maybe Hitchcock and his scholars that strikes you as something interesting in this movie in a way?
Well, in the courtroom scene, there are also those POV shots through a monocle of the judge, and we see this sort of image within an image through an optical trick. He moves around the monocle, and there's basically a separate image within the monocle. That made me think of the single glass from the pair of glasses in which we see the murder being reflected in Strangers on the Train, in a way. Yes, and there's definitely this very interesting, as you said, this flashback structure through objects, also through camera movement, because the camera pulls back from the objects, and that's how it's revealed that, okay, so now we are in the past, now we are in the present, and we go back and forth. And also, I guess there's this sort of interesting shot that you mentioned of the telephone operator listening in and reacting to what she's hearing, which is a marriage proposal. So, as you said, it has been, praised at the time. It also made me think of that Abbas Kiarostami experiment, Siri, I think it was called, or Shiri, where throughout the whole film we only see the faces of the viewers of a melodramatic film, and we see them crying, laughing, but we never see the actual screen. So here also, like, Hitchcock focuses on the reaction, and he allows us to think what's happening on the other end. And of course it made me think of the most famous instance of Hitchcock substituting the reaction for the action, usually in a sexual way, of course, in Rear Window, in which James Stewart is looking at the window behind which the newlyweds are having sex all the time. And he only sees the curtain, but he smiles because he sort of feels the pleasure or imagines the pleasure that the newlyweds keep having. So it's this way that Hitchcock was also, thinking that showing a reaction can make our mind work, the viewers' mind work. But no, I honestly don't find much to save this film. I mean, there are those separate shots that will stay with me, but the whole second half is just this parlor games and those judgmental glances and the heroine that is trying to, escape them. And I was struggling. I was struggling watching this film because it suddenly seems like Hitchcock doesn't care. Like, he just doesn't care even about the form of the film. There's not many visual touches to keep us interesting. Although one has to ask the question, maybe there is some thematic elements that he was invested in, and probably this harshly caricatured domineering mother is one of them, right? As Barr says, she's the Mrs. Bates before Mrs. Bates, something like that. She's the domineering mother of the character.
Yes, I would add one shot, which is the dining room in the house, which strikes me as a very interesting composition and a bit scary. We mentioned in our previous episode about Downhill, we mentioned that Hitchcock uses architecture very smartly. And in this case, we see, this traditional family's meal, and they have pictures of saints hanging on walls, and and these pictures, thin figures are overwhelming. They kind of dwarf the characters, which I found, a pretty strong visual metaphor, or just pretty strong image. But as far as themes go, you of course you're right. We can see, you mentioned the mother is caricatured, that she's it's a bit over the top performance by the actress, by the way, who appeared in Downhill as a guest of this restaurant where the main hero works as a gigolo. We have several recurring actors in this movie. Maybe we'll mention that later. But also, some people, some commentators say that that Easy Virtue is a framework for Notorious, of course. It's a pretty common reading, and once again, this is this kind of reading that I have problems with all the time. That we watch his early movie, which is not very good, which is interesting for us as Hitchcock scholars, but of course, the way to read it and the way to interpret it is kind of anachronistically by putting Notorious next to Easy Virtue and looking at similarities. And of course, there are some similarities, including even one of the titles, which says it's Notorious Larita Filton, right? So we have this word which will become the title of the movie, and we're looking actually at the cover of a wonderful book by Patrick Keating that Michał have read already, the Dynamic Frame, which shows us the Ingrid Bergman from Notorious. So we're surrounded by Hitchcock themes. So this is one that she's this, fallen woman, and so if you love Notorious and if you still haven't seen Easy Virtue, that's probably one of the reasons why you can watch it, like to look how Hitchcock prepared this, let's say, passive woman story or woman martyr story. Because, of course, I'm always thinking about other movies that were made around the same time that maybe somehow echo Hitchcock's movies. And in this case, certainly Carl Theodor Dreyer had no idea that this movie existed, or maybe he saw it. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the next year he released, of course, the famous Passion of Joan of Arc, which is
also a courtroom drama. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. Notorious. It's mentioned a lot in the context of this film. Also, because I think that in Notorious, probably one of the Hitchcock's themes that were he was most concerned with comes to such a clear view, which is this sort of fear or maybe desire to have one's sexuality placed in public view, right? That basically Ingrid Bergman's sexuality becomes part of a larger picture of actually international proportions, right? That she's becoming sort of involved, and her sex life is sort of part of an international intrigue. Here, the character in Easy Virtue has her sexual life exposed for the cameras, and it turns out to be a very destroying, depleting experience. Shoot, there's nothing left to kill. Like, I have no more intimacy. It's all there, right? It's all in the public view, and I think that's interesting for many reasons. First of all, because Hitchcock was so secretive about his sexuality, even his sexuality within marriage. And also, he was famously, dirty-mouthed when it came to everybody else's sexuality. So the contrast is striking between his being secretive and also him being obscene when it came to other people. So here it's all about other people, let's say, and how they perceive our character, Isabel Jeans, who actually has also a personal tie to Notorious, which is fascinating. I never read this, but you discovered something.
Yes, between 1913 and 1915, she was the wife of Claude Rains, who later starred in Notorious. So this is a fascinating example of this interconnections, and now we kind of are gossiping about this Hitchcock company, let's say.
I have a fantastic idea, and I think you should write this down. We can collaborate on this. We should prepare a series for, I don't know, Mommy or Film Forum, like uncommon ties, like unlikely ties. Just find pairs of movies that are connected just like that, by somebody's marriage, or I think that would be terrific double bills. We need to think about that.
So if you want another one, then the main hero, who's played by Robin Irvine, he was married to Ursula Jeans, who was the sister of the main actress.
That's another one. So really, we should do this, because I think there will be some unlikely pairings. So that sounds like a plan. And yes, apparently those two films, Downhill and Easy Virtue, both made for Gainsborough. I think this may be controversial, or I don't know, maybe completely wrong, but maybe those films give us an idea more of what English films at the time were like, whereas The Lodger would be more of a quote-unquote German film, in that it was clearly influenced by Expressionism, and maybe this Easy Virtue and maybe Downhill is like closer to the run-of-the-mill English productions of the time. And the next film that we will discuss on this podcast, The Ring, is actually more, again, expressionistic and definitely more in the vein of German expressionism. But that will be our next episode. Any closing remarks on Easy Virtue?
So the one more thing I remember is a kiss, which is in the second part of the movie, The Holidays at Côte d'Azur in France. There is a long kiss that Hitchcock stages, which looks pretty fake nowadays, but I think we should note it as one of the first Hitchcock kisses.
Wonderful. And Notorious also has a Notorious kiss. So we will come back to Notorious, of course, in some episodes from now. But I guess we are not knocking down the film. It's not that you shouldn't watch it, especially for Hitchcock completists. It's a must. However, yes, it is. I think it is a lesser work, definitely, and I probably won't be revisiting anytime soon unless there is a wonderful restoration. Then I would like to see it.
Yes, live with orchestra.
Absolutely. Okay, so this was our Easy Virtue episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please like our fan page on Facebook, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock. Please write us at hitchcock.podcast@gmail.com, and we would love to hear your feedback. We are really trying to make this podcast as interesting as possible, and we send a greeting to all Hitchcock fans out there. If you like the show, if you like this episode, please tweet about us. We still are looking for our Hitchcock loving audience. Thank you so much. Greetings from Warsaw, and see you next time at Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.